Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Premier Space Fans Talk. I'm Dan Rivera, of course. Uh, Here we have Mr. David Bio Baranek. I hope I didn't butcher that too hard, Dave.
Close,
But
Dan. Baranek.
Baranek, excuse me. All
Baranek
right,
rhymes with bionic, and that's how I got my call sign.
there. That's why I wanted to do that.
There you go.
All right, so Dave was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Hey, you grew up drawing airplane pictures and putting together like the old scale models, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not really a good modeler, but in my mind, it really fueled my enthusiasm for aviation. So
Excellent. Basically, you said how did you set your sights on being a jet fighter pilot or real?
man, I'll
Curious.
tell you what, I wish I could remember a specific event, but what I do remember, because I've thought about this, in the years since, uh, my parents used to take us to air shows in Jacksonville. There was an air show just basically every year, and Blue Angels almost all the time. Thunderbirds came by at least once when I was a kid, and we went to air shows in Jacksonville and the area. And sometime around, I think when I was in around sixth or seventh grade, so I was, however old that was, 11, whatever, I decided I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And after I made that decision, I never changed my mind. Before that, I'd been wondering, oh, what do I want to be? You know how kids are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
after I decided that fighter pilot thing, I stuck with that. And so the next decision was once I graduated from high school and I was going into college, I was applying for ROTC scholarships. I had to decide whether Air Force or Navy. And this is, to me, at that time, I was still going to be a pilot because I had 20/20 vision. But I remember talking to my dad about it, even though he had been enlisted in the Air Force in the 1950s, didn't make a career of it, just served a few years. But he goes, Dave, I think you should go in the Navy. And that set the course of my life because I went to Navy ROTC at Georgia Tech. And while I was in college, my eyesight went bad. So there's no way I could be a pilot because back in 1975, 76, they didn't have LASIK surgery. And I don't even know what the rules are now. So I don't even, I'm not an expert on all that stuff. But anyway, so I couldn't be a pilot. So luckily, I mean, Dan, this caused me some distress. I mean,
I can
I
imagine.
fretted about this for months. And then I just realized, well, I'll just have to be a Rio or I'll have to try to be a Rio. And the Navy was coming out with the brand new
Yeah.
F-14. And so that became my goal, being a Rio. And still, you don't designate yourself as a Rio. It's still, very competitive. You have to be selected. You have to do well on tests. You have to do well at Pensacola, et cetera. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
everything worked out and I ended up being an F-14 Rio.
How long was your training over there at Pensacola?
Well, when I went through Pensacola, it was about, I always say about 10 months, but really it's about 11 months, a small distinction, a little bit less than a year. And then I went to the F-14 training squadron in San Diego, and that was about 10 months.
Right.
So less than 2 years
That's
after I
cool.
graduated from college. From college.
So it's from what I've read, you've gotten over 2,400 hours in the F-14. Is that right?
Dan, throughout my entire career, of course, I keep logbooks on every aviator. At
Mm-hmm.
least the Navy does. I'm sure the Air Force
That's a
does. And
big one.
yeah, that's three of them stuck together. And
Holy
early in
smokes!
my career, I flew a lot. I got 1,000 F-14 flight hours as a Rio less than 3 years after my first flight. So that includes the training squadron where I only got 100 hours. So I mean,
Really?
I flew a lot in my first squadron, and then things slowed down a lot. And so I just flew like an average, an average rate. And then when I retired, and my point is that I never really like, surged to try to get hours or anything. And then a few months after I retired, I pulled my logbook out and I go, I wonder how many flight hours I had. And I had in F-14 hours, I had 2,499.7.
That's that. See,
Three tenths of an hour more, I could have had an even 2,500, but oh well.
And 688 carrier landings up to boot with that.
Yeah.
Now, were you you did the movie Top Gun? You did a lot of sequences with the F5F, right?
Yes, I also have about 450 flight hours in the F5F.
Okay,
and that's a dual control F5.
Oh, I see. Oh, good. That was my next question.
You know what? The F5F is the F5 is a cool airplane. I mean, it's got a lot of fans around the world. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and we were just looking at F5As and Bs because I grew up, I was born in 1958. So for my formative years, the E model, the Tiger II, had not come out yet. But it's just a cool looking small airplane. And then when I flew in Top Gun, flew in the F5F, I learned what a versatile and capable airplane it is. It's easily supersonic. It's got a good level of maneuverability. It's very reliable. And, in a combat configuration, it's versatile, carrying air missiles, air ground missiles and stuff. So, yeah, I thought it was cool that I got some to fly the F5.
Now, one thing that's been burning in my mind for ever since I saw the movie myself. Were you the one taking pictures in the back of the F5? You can see the flash on the when they're doing like some of the aerial scenes. You can see some of the pictures taken. I can see the flash.
That could have been me. I can't claim it was me for sure because I think at least one other Rio took a camera up, but I don't know who it was, but that could have been me. And yeah, that's you're an astute observer to notice, but that's like a sun glint reflecting off of a camera lens.
Yeah, I saw that.
What it looks like to me.
It looked like a flash almost. They were taking pictures, and then there was a flash. Yeah.
So now that we're talking about it, I think that video segment is there's two F5s flying together, and so that guy would be taking pictures of the camera plane, which would have been a Learjet, and I took my pictures of the Learjet when there were Tomcats flying next to it. So let's see. You can see that.
Oh, wow. I can see that.
Yeah.
There's the Learjet.
Excuse me. I took my picture of Learjet when there was an F5 flying next to it. Three F5s flying next to it. So, but maybe I was moving my camera when they were taking movies or something like that.
Yeah, I think Heater was in the back seat with Bozo when they did the flyby scene.
But that was an F-14.
Right. But when they were doing the actual scenes up there.
Oh yeah, Heater did ride in Bozo's back seat, and a few years ago, I wrote an article for the AIAA, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronauts. Right, I wrote an article for them, and then I converted that into a bonus chapter in this book, and I basically interviewed Heater and Bozo and mashed their experiences together and talked about more of the F-14 perspective on filming the movie. Because when I was there, I was a Top Gun instructor flying in the F-5F. And so, I know what my experience was, but there was a lot of the F-14 experience that I missed until I spent some time interviewing those guys. I mean, and I knew them from Miramar. We knew each other back in the day.
I mean, you guys used to go out drinking and partying together and everything like that. So I think
we did drink now and then, occasionally. I think I had one beer a week.
Right. I noticed something. Did you participate in that bar scene?
Nope. And here's why. That's an Dan. This gives me the opportunity. I mean, we're getting right into the nitty gritty here.
That's
This
what
gives
we
me the
wanted to do.
opportunity to make a point. Again, like I said, I was the Top Gun instructor. There were 16 of us that were Top Gun instructors. We had our names at the end of the movie. And they were telling people at Miramar, they said, if you want to be in this bar scene, you have to come to the set for 2 days. And
Mm-mm.
they said the reason is that they were going to film, various scenes, and they wanted to be able to film them both days. I mean, this is what I remember. And so if you were in one day, they wanted you there the next day in case they filmed it again. Well, we were busy having a Top Gun class. And
Right.
so to my knowledge, none of the ground scenes include current Top Gun instructors. Now there's a few scenes. Well, not
Really?
they. Yeah, there's a few scenes where Heater is in it, and he had been a Top Gun instructor, but at the time he was a RAG instructor, and those guys were busy also.
Rag instructors.
Yeah, but RAG is the nickname for the Fleet Replacement Squadron, the F-14 Training Squadron. So Heater was a RAG instructor, but he was also pretty helpful in filming the movie and stuff. So he was able to make his schedule work so he could go over and participate in filming the ground scenes. And then a lot of those ground scenes also include student F-14 pilots and student Rios from the RAG.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. The From what I understand, the backdrop for the movie Top Gun, which I've been reading a lot about it, and I think it's pretty cool, is one of Heater's pictures.
Well, it's not one picture, it's a series of pictures, but you're close. It's a
Mm-hmm.
series of pictures that he took to illustrate an article in California magazine.
Yes.
And if you can put this link or something now, put it up on video, or at least I'll say it on my website, topgunbio.com. I worked with the F-14 pilot who's the subject of that article, and we put the whole article on my website as a tribute to the gentleman who wrote it, and we have Heater's pictures and all the other stuff. It's presented on my website verbatim.
Okay, I'll make sure that we get that up there.
Yeah, it's
I
on
see it.
topgunbio.com, and you can see a California magazine article or whatever it was. The article was called Top Guns. It's a very good article.
So, guys, if you go to topgunbio.com,
That's it.
you'll be able to see this what we're talking about here. So, you'll be able to see the actual article that was made. That was the article for the basis of the movie Top Gun.
That inspired
Yep.
Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer to make the movie.
Yep, definitely. I did read about that, and I haven't read the article yet, which I want to read the article myself. I've been
Good.
looking for a copy of it. Now I know where to go.
Yeah.
So go check it out, guys. TopGunBio.com, and order Bio's books. Order Bio's books, guys.
Thanks.
No, we're going to be also putting a link to your website on our fan website as well.
Okay. Well, let's get back
yeah.
to our main topic. So what are we talking about here?
All right. So now, basically, we went past the Top Gun days in your retirement. You retired in 1999. Is that right?
I did. I retired in 99 after 20 years. And a lot of my contemporaries stayed in, and they were enthusiastic about continuing to serve. But for me, the demands of deployments and other things, I just decided I was ready to get out. So then, about a year and a half after I got out, I was driving home from work, and I thought, oh, I want to write a magazine article about making the movie Top Gun.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then after just a couple of minutes, I go, No, I'm going to write a book. So I got home. I told my wife, I want to write a book. And so she goes, oh, that's a good idea. She goes, you need a hobby. And so that's what started my first book, Top Gun Days. And it was, for me, it was a lot of fun doing the research, uh, going through my logbook, going through various notes that I had, and selecting the stories that I thought were the most interesting and most informative, and then writing them in a way that people could understand them.
And I actually saw pieces of your book online. I was reading on Amazon, and they give you little snippets of it. And I'm like, oh, I got to get this book. I've got to get this book. And now that I know that you have three, I'm like, okay, what the files? We When the heater was in in Tucson, okay, and I've got pictures of him and I together against with our F-14. I was asking him. I said, who's the pilot or who is the involved in the aggressor squad? And he says, oh, that's Bio. And he said it right there. He said, that's Bio. Get a hold of him. He's good. You know,
Oh well, I need to buy Hooter. Hooter. I need to buy Heater
Hooter.
a beer. Sorry, Heater. See, I flew with a pilot named Hooter for a while, so that's my mistake. I saw Heater last year. We were both in San Diego for a
Top Gun
Top Gun
days.
movie event. Yeah,
Yep.
and I get together with him now and then over the years. So and I knew him back at Miramar a long time ago. But I'll tell you what, he had a very interesting career himself because he was a MiG pilot in the 4477. Did he tell you
Yep.
about that?
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
Yes, he did. He
which
was at
at the
he was at
time,
Area 51.
well, it was at
We can't talk
Tonopah.
about
Let's
that.
say that at the
We can't.
time it was very highly classified, but now there's books written about it, and of course I've got them. I've got a couple of those books, so
Wow.
that's a very cool program.
Yeah, well, we can't. The truth is out there, type of thing. I know what you're talking about.
Well, the 4477 the MiGs, that's not classified at all. So I mean, it's been
Right.
unclassified, so
Yeah, they did a
or
lot of.
declassified.
They would pick apart the enemy aircraft just to see how they would perform, what all the hype was, and everything like that. So I know all about that. What type of emergencies have you encountered for flying?
That's a good question. I can think back, and one of my first real emergencies was during my first deployment. We were doing a 1v1 similar uh, air combat maneuvering (ACM), which is dogfighting out over the ocean. We were doing visual split, so we were just a mile and a half from each other, turn in, and we didn't even use afterburner because we wanted to conserve our fuel. So it was a lot of nose low to preserve your energy and airspeed. And at the end of the first engagement, my pilot and I, we're down there. The fight terminated at 5,000 feet above the ocean. And so we go to climb up back up to our start altitude, and he lit the afterburner, and our left afterburner just blew out. It blew a big flame out the back of the airplane.
Oh my!
And so that made the airplane yaw sideways a little bit, but not that much because he was on top of it. The guy I was flying with was Streak. He was a former Top Gun instructor by coincidence, and a very capable pilot. And so just having an engine blowout wasn't that big of a deal. He recovered the airplane very quickly, or kept control of the airplane. But we had to do a single engine carrier landing.
Right.
So that's kind of an emergency. I got my pocket checklist out. This is a later pocket checklist, I think. Or wait a minute. Oh no, this is an early one. The date is oh no, it's a middle one, 1987.
1987. Wow.
Yeah, that's later. Not like this NATOPS manual is 1978. So that's an old one.
My goodness, would I love to have that in my collection?
Hey, I earned it, buddy.
I know you did.
So,
I
so
know you
we
did.
did a, single engine carrier landing, and for me, One, I was a new Rio. I was in the squadron less than 6 months, but I was combat qualified because that's what you are when you get to
Right.
the fleet.
Right.
And so, Streak expected me to do my job as a Rio. So I had my checklist out. I was backing him up on the single engine landing procedures and doing all that stuff. But once we secured the bad engine, it was just a question of flying around on the good engine, managing fuel, and then flying the carrier approach, which he did extremely well. And to our benefit, it was a sunny, clear, calm, just beautiful day out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So that was an emergency, um, but really it was over pretty quickly.
Okay.
The
What
one
was
funny
that?
thing about that is the other airplane was one of my buddies,
Mhm.
and when we got back on the ship, he goes, man, when you guys lost the engine, he goes, you should have seen there was a yellow flame about 50 feet long came out the
Wow.
back of the engine. He goes,
Wow.
he said, I was going to get out my camera and ask you to do it again so I could get a picture, but he didn't.
Wow, that's that is amazing. Was that caused by a compressor stall, or what? What was that? Yeah.
I think there was FOD in that engine,
Wow.
foreign object damage.
Right. That's why they do the FOD walks on the carrier
Yeah,
decks.
but still, actually I do not remember what the cause of that one was. But I think that's what it was. Then a couple of months, well, I mean, on my next deployment, we had a single engine catapult shot,
Ooh, yipe.
and in this case, it wasn't just a burner blowout. Which I mean, we lost the engine when I was flying with Streak, but this is when I was flying with Petro on the single engine cat shot, and the main shaft of the engine sheared when the catapult or
Whoa.
when he was in zone 5 on the catapult. The main shaft sheared. So, and the catapult fired, he glanced down, and that engine was going through 40% RPM, descending, decreasing. So we
Wow.
came off the angle with one engine in zone 5 and the other engine basically nothing. So luckily
Wow.
Petro handled it perfectly, because the Tomcat had a problem, potential problem. When you come off the cat, of course, the wings are all the way out. And one time, a sad, tragic event that happened in the Atlantic Fleet Squadron. They had a single engine cat shot, and as they came off, the aircrew, the pilot didn't know that he had to keep the nose down. So unfortunately, he let the nose rise just a little bit, and then the airplane yawed,
Oh my
and that
goodness.
was enough to make the airplane flip over, and they were right off the catapult, and so it crashed, and it was
Hmm.
two fatalities.
Oh my
Yeah, it was
goodness.
it was tragic, but um, the Navy, that's why they take all these videos of carrier operations. People analyze that and very quickly said, hey, if you lose an engine on the cat, the most important thing to do is keep the nose down, but less than 10 degrees, as I recall, and feed in full rudder to control the yaw. And so when we came off the cat, Petro, man, when he saw that RPM going down, he knew exactly what to expect. So he flew the airplane like an expert, even though it was his first deployment in the Tomcat. So, this he was well trained. Comes off the catapult, has full right rudder. The plane comes off, and because we were slower than we should have been, it
Right.
settled and it yawed. And I don't have engine information in the back seat, so I just feel this wonky cat shot, and I came up and I go, Petro, what are you doing? He goes, we lost the left engine. I got it. I
Right.
go, oh, okay. Well, good job. So that turned out to be the kind of emergency that I hated, because, okay, so he saves the airplane. We're flying away. And it wasn't even so challenging. He didn't even consider jettisoning the external stores. we were flying just
Mhm.
fine. I mean, we weren't carrying a lot anyway, but we could have jettisoned the tanks and a couple of missiles and got rid of some drag and a little bit of weight, but we didn't need to.
Yeah, definitely.
But for the next hour and a half, we spent trying to manage our fuel. And there was some kind of problem. The F-14's fuel transfer system was strange. I mean, maybe it was good, maybe it was efficient, but if it had a problem, it really had a problem. And so what we were doing was we had one engine that wasn't working,
Mhm.
and the other and all the fuel on that side of the airplane, we couldn't get to it. It's supposed to transfer side to side and all kinds of stuff. It's supposed to do it either automatically or the pilot can go to override and transfer it manually. Nothing was working. So we're flying around trying to manage our fuel and trying to get down to landing weight. And we can't dump fuel because every time we dumped it, it came out of the good engine side. So we're only dealing with half of our fuel.
Wow.
So finally, as we're flying around, burning down, and I'm doing all the landing weight calculations, um, they said, are you guys, do you have landing weight? Are you down in good landing weight? I go, yeah, we're good to go. Even though we were a couple thousand pounds overweight, probably. I go, they probably have, they've got some slop in the calculations. So we came in and I think we landed with about 800 pounds in the tanks. And that's, um, you know, about 8-10 minutes of flying time, which is not much. If we had gone around, we would have probably run out of fuel. But luckily, Petro flew a very smooth pass,
Profile,
and
right?
we trapped on that landing. So that was the kind of emergency where we were flying around for more than an hour, about an hour and a half, and the whole time we're trying to work on this problem. And so you're just working the problem for a long time. It wasn't like a quick emergency.
That's pretty interesting because I've seen a lot of those cold cat shots and the um, when you get flying or you lose an engine or something like that. I've seen a lot of mishaps, videos about it, and I can't imagine to actually experience one like you did. I mean, I'm like, wow, wow. It's like, what are you
And
doing?
I had an ejection.
Oh, that was my next question. How have you seen any ejections?
When I was in December 1981, about 7 months after I got to my first squadron, my pilot was Commander Bill Switzer, who was the squadron commander, and he retired. He was a CAG twice. He was a CAG and a super CAG, retired as a captain. So we had a great daytime flight in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and we came back and landed, caught the four wire, and as soon as we caught it, it slowed us down, and then it just let us go. I mean, so we slowed down, we're leaning forward in our straps, and then the plane's just rolling down the flight deck. So, that's
Crazy.
not good. So my
No.
my brain went into hyperspeed. I was thinking about, what am I supposed to do and all that. Reflexively, I grabbed the lower handle, but we're rolling down the flight deck, and as we get to the end of the angle, Skipper Switzer said, "Eject, eject." So I pulled the handle on the first E because I knew what he was going to say. So
Amazing stuff.
we came out just as the airplane went over the angle, and we both landed in the water. And I got tangled up in my parachute and had to cut myself out. Skipper Switzer did not get a parachute. He went splashing across the water. But we both survived and returned to flying. I mean, I had no issues at all. I was ready to fly as soon as the flight surgeon cleared me. He had a fracture in his neck vertebrae, and so he had to wait 30 days before he could fly again.
All right, I have a question from the
Go.
audience. Okay,
Yeah.
and it's from Chance. One thing that always burns in everybody's mind out there is, what is the sensation like when you eject?
Well, I think people have different experiences because I've heard other people talk about their experience. In my case, um, one, I can tell anybody that's listening or watching, if you've
Hmm.
ever been in a car accident, you might have experienced this. It was time distortion. To me, my brain just went to super speed, hyper speed, and I started having all these thoughts. Now, on the other hand, um, I couldn't, like move my hands real quick or anything. It's just that my brain was thinking fast. But meanwhile, we're rolling down the flight deck at 50 knots, and I had, limited time, and then I had to make that decision and pull the handle, which, as I said, my pilot, Skipper
Right,
Switzer, he
right.
helped me make the decision. So as soon as I pulled the handle, I saw this smoke in the cockpit, and my brain is still at super speed, and I'm thinking, oh,
Goodness.
that's the cockpit detonation cord, which was something that we had discussed in a training session just a
Mm.
few days before in the squadron.
Right.
And I just remembered that, and I pulled the handle, saw the smoke, and I go, oh, that's the shield model detonating cord. And then this biggest disappointment to me was when my seat fired, I blacked out.
Does it actually black you out when you do that?
Well, I did.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if that was because, it's like an instantaneous 20 G's or whatever it is. And I was pretty relaxed because when in dogfights, I pulled 6, I pulled 8 G's and, did not black out. But that was when you're getting ready for a dogfight. And I was just sitting there, for a carrier landing, and all of a sudden I get 20 G's. So, or I don't know if my brain just shut down, because it's like, oh, Dave, you don't want to see this. So it
Hmm.
turned
Well,
off the light.
so basically, what we're saying here is that it's like taking a hammer and just going like that to a nail, and then real quick, like good force to your whole body.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's one way to
Mm.
put it. So for me, as my seat was firing, now the plane started to fall by the time my seat fired, because I pulled the handle as we got to the end of the angle, I guess. I mean, I pulled it as soon as I was able to, and that's just when I was able to. So
Interesting.
the plane came over to the off the angle, and it just started falling. It didn't like glide or anything. It came off the angle and just dropped like a rock. And my seat fired while the plane was going down because I went straight up, and the LSOs on the flight deck, a few of them watched the plane. They just happened to follow it, and they saw the action. And
Wow.
they said I went as high as the
Wow.
tail of an A7, but which was about 16 feet. So luckily I was over the water. So I went up that high, and I came down and splashed into the water. I got my parachute open. I got one swing in the chute, and I splashed into the water. Now in my brain, this whole time, I remember perceiving the rocket ride in the seat.
Mhm.
But I was in a state of confusion. I've said this. I described this in detail in Top Gun days. But I
Mhm.
think I said the first thing I
Right.
remember is I was sitting there wondering, how old am I? That was my that was the first thought I can recall when my brain was starting up again. And then I very quickly realized what happened, and then I opened my eyes just before I splashed into the water.
Wow. Now, is it true also that when you eject, that it makes you shorter, or really?
I had I had zero physical issues. I mean, my
Really?
height was measured every year for my annual physical. It's exactly the same before and after. And
I've
they
heard a
took
lot of I've heard a lot of people actually say that that makes you, kind of compresses your back a little bit.
one. I was 23 years old, so I was pretty young and flexible. Yeah,
Like, how many versions of the Tomcat did you fly in?
So the U.S. Navy has operated three versions of the F-14 in fleet service: the F-14A, F-14B, and the B had new engines and the same radar.
Mhm.
And then the F-14D, which had new engines and a new radar.
Right.
So my first two squadrons were F-14A squadrons because in the 1980s, when I first flew, there was only F-14As. And when I came back for my second F-14 squadron, the majority of squadrons were still A models. And so I went back to an A squadron. And then when I came back for my third tour, which was my tour as a squadron executive officer and commanding officer,
Mhm.
I was selected to command an F-14A squadron. So in my training, I would fly aircraft that had the AWG-9. So when I was at the RAG, they put me in F-14As and a few F-14Bs because in the B, even though it had new engines, it still had the AWG-9 radar, and that's what I needed training on.
AWG-9 radar. Yep.
So I never flew the F-14D. I know a lot of guys that did, and on the F-14 Tomcat, we talked to pilots and Rios who flew the D model, and they just cannot say enough about what
Right.
a generation improvement it was, because the F-14A, Grumman did an incredible job designing this airframe. I mean, the airframe was brilliant, designed in the late 1960s, but they were hamstrung by one, financial situation. I mean, I remember, Dan, I don't know about you, but I remember that people were just freaking out when the F-14 cost more than $10 million.
Yeah, they were.
And so Grumman had to save weight and money at every turn. And so, the F-14A had a fair amount of compromises.
Right.
And plus, it was using the AWG-9, which was early 60s technology. I mean, the AWG-9 programming guide is available online. You just type in like AWG-9 programming guide and you'll get the book. It's that it was planned for the F-111B.
Yeah, the F-111B. That's what I read. I'm trying to remember my thought here, but
so my point was that the F-14D, it breaks my heart as a Tomcat guy. It breaks my heart, Dan, that the Navy didn't convert to D models sooner and make more of them. But those were the realities that we were dealing with. There's a lot of decisions, a lot of competition for money, et cetera. So
yeah, a lot of maintenance issues too. But I mean,
and there were a fair amount of maintenance issues, but people throw that out, and in some cases, it's a little bit uninformed, I think. I mean, I've written a couple of articles online, and I've taken the time to dig up maintenance man hours per flight hour for the F-14, different variations. And, it's a complex issue.
Complex issue. Yep. Yep. All right, moving right along, we got another question here for you. Now, this question is kind of a statement and a question. The question is, do you remember how you felt the first time you landed on an aircraft carrier?
Oh, the first time I landed on an aircraft carrier. Man, I was behind the airplane. When I landed on the carrier first time, I had probably 80 Tomcat hours. And so, the RAG, they trained us, and carrier landings are near the end of the syllabus, and you do a lot of field carrier landing practices.
Right.
But when you go out there and do it for real, it was so different. And it was really fairly overwhelming for me. So I landed on the airplane, and my brain is about 3 miles back, at the initial, or as we're starting our descent. Luckily, I was flying with a former F-4 Phantom pilot, call sign Barnyard, great guy, who was upgrading to the Tomcat. And so he already had, a couple hundred carrier landings in the F-4. So he was able to, make everything happen safely while I came up to speed. And then one reason I admit this is just to tell people that this fighter aviation environment, carrier aviation environment, is challenging. But one thing that I realized was a few months after that first landing, I finished the RAG, I went to my fleet squadron, and we started landing on the carrier regularly.
Right.
And within just a few weeks, I started feeling very comfortable in the carrier landing environment. So it's just a demonstration of what the human brain can get used to.
Plays tricks on you, basically.
Yeah.
Your mind plays tricks on you, more or less.
Well, it just has to get accustomed to the new environment. It was for me. It was similar to the air combat maneuvering training. When I first did that, it was just confusing. But then after a while, it's like, oh, I got it.
Yeah. They basically said, I would imagine it is something a flight simulator cannot replicate.
Oh, I can tell you my thought on that.
What?
Because we did it in the simulator. We did it many times in the simulator. But your brain has an awareness when you're sitting in a room with linoleum tile and fluorescent lights. And even though you're seeing a carrier out there and you may be working hard and stuff, and the back seater is sitting there, watching the numbers change and watching everything, your brain knows that you're in a room. Whereas when you're sitting in it, you can crash all day in the simulator and still, go to lunch or go home for dinner. But when you're in a jet, it's the real thing. And so they can, now the simulators are useful. They're very useful. And I experienced this when I did some complicated missile shoots. The simulators help prepare your brain for all the things that you're going to have to do in the real situation. But still, it's not, I don't care what kind of simulator it is. In my experience, it's not nearly as stressful as sitting in the jet, strapping in, feeling the G's. And whether you feel a G or not, I'm in a jet. If we screw up, it's going to be ugly.
Yes.
Yeah. So a simulator is useful, but in my experience, it can't, it's not like the real thing.
All right. So the Tomcat, we were going to be getting back here. We were talking about the Tomcat now. So, the
So
Tomcat.
you want me to tell you what I think is the biggest misconception about the Tomcat?
What's that?
Some people say the Tomcat was the best interceptor. And I have to take them to task and correct them, because the Tomcat was not designed as an interceptor. When I think of an interceptor, when serious aviation people talk about an interceptor, they talk about something like the F-106, Delta Dart, or the British Lightning, which, those aircraft were interceptors. The Tomcat was designed as the Navy's air superiority fighter. I mean, it was designed as the F-15 for the Navy. It had a similar mission. And people can say, whatever they want to say about comparing the aircraft, but the Navy needed an airplane that was carrier capable, which the F-15 is not. And that dictated a lot of the Tomcat designs. Plus, the Navy needed the F-14 to carry the Phoenix missile. And that also added a lot of design features. But when the Tomcat was new, from the start, it had air-to-ground weapons capability. I mean, and even when I flew Tomcats, the first time I got in a Tomcat in 1980, it had an air-to-ground weapons control panel in there. So that was not an add-on later when the Bombcat mission came up. So it was not an interceptor. It was the Navy's air superiority multi-purpose fighter. And it was designed in with maneuverability, dogfight capability that was superior to the Phantom when it was new.
Interesting. Now I understand that. Can we talk about the compressor stall issue that the A model had?
Yeah. Well, we didn't talk about them very much, and the TF-30 did have the TF-30 was the engine of the F-14A, and it did have some compressor stall issues. But in my 2,500 flight hours, I had very few compressor stalls, and I did a lot of dogfights during those flight hours. And so I think, unfortunately, the popular aviation press has taken that and seized on it and made a big deal out of it. And in fact, in the F-14 Tomcast, we talked to several pilots about that, and they said, "No, I didn't have compressor stalls," or "Yeah, I had one in all my years," because the reality was they respected the engine, and so they worked around it. Now, is that the optimum situation? No.
Mhm.
But the reality is, Tomcat pilots, F-14A pilots were able to work with the TF-30. Sometimes, yes, it screwed up. It had a compressor stall or the engine blew up, and sometimes that was recoverable, and other times it led to bigger problems such as loss of aircraft, etc. Bad
Okay.
situation. But it's not like every time you manned up an F-14A, you said, "Oh, I hope the plane doesn't crash." No, it wasn't like that at all. And even when I was a squadron commander back in 1997, 98, we were flying F-14As. On a professional level, like I will admit, I'm disappointed that the Navy is still making us fly F-14As when the Air Force is flying F-15Cs, F-16Cs. Okay.
Yeah.
But the young lieutenant pilots in my squadron, they were proud to fly F-14As. They knew how to employ the aircraft, and we were capable of doing our mission and taking the fight to anybody who would, any enemy, pilots and Rios. So it was, even the A model was a capable aircraft to the very end. On the other hand, the D model, as I will always say, is like, God, why didn't they do those, make more of those and start making them earlier?
I've seen cockpits. I've seen cockpits enough of the F-14 to where as far let's talk about the actual. Is it really cramped inside? As far as
Cramped? Oh no, the F-14 had a very roomy cockpit. And in fact, as I said, um, and I got to quit saying as I said, but the Tomcat was designed in the late 1960s. And so you know, it was not as modern as many aircraft that we're familiar with now. But by the time they designed it, uh, aircraft designers had learned a lot of lessons from the previous generation and from combat experience in Vietnam, including stories of Phantom pilots who said they had to look into the cockpit to either select a weapon or do something like that. And that was a terrible thing to have to do during a dogfight. So the Tomcat had a good HOTAS capability, hands on throttle and stick. The throttle and stick had a lot of weapons control uh, buttons. And the Tomcat improved a lot of the flaws of earlier aircraft that people had not realized were flaws.
right about Top Gun. Okay. What do you think the movie did bad and good for the legacy of the Tomcat?
Oh, bad and good related for the Tomcat. That's a good question. Uh, Top Gun, it perpetuated, the engine stall leading to a flat spin, leading to a fatal ejection. But on the other hand, the plot, they needed to have a mishap with someone get killed, and so that is what we came up with. When I say we, My recollection is that the Top Gun instructors, one guy specifically, Rat, was our primary liaison officer, and he was working with the script writers and other people on the early versions of the script, and they needed um, the dramatic hook of a person getting killed, and it wasn't going to be Tom Cruise. So, okay, Goose, sorry, you're going to buy it in this movie. So, Rat had been a F-14 pilot, and he was a Top Gun instructor at the time, and we all talked about this. And I remember just talking about, okay, what is a mishap where the Rio could get killed and the pilot could survive? And you'll hear different versions of this. I've tried to
Right.
find definitive information online, but I haven't been able to find definitively. My recollection is that the Navy or Grumman were doing testing on the Tomcat, some kind of either high angle of attack testing or out of control testing. The plane got in a flat spin. The aircrew ejected. The Rio hit the canopy and broke his leg.
Wow.
He was not killed, but he broke his leg. So, as a result of that testing incident in the early 1980s or late 1970s, probably early 1980s, they changed the procedure in the F-14 community. If you're in a flat spin and you have to eject, jettison the canopy first. And the reason is that in a flat spin, the airflow would not carry the canopy away. So that's why the Rio hit the canopy on the ejection. But if you jettison the canopy, then that adds just a half second or a second to let the canopy get out of the way of the ejection seats.
Wow, that's interesting. I never realized that.
So, as Top Gun instructors and former Tomcat pilots in Rios, we were familiar with this mishap and with the emergency procedure. And we also knew that in flat spins, some Rios just did not remember to jettison the canopy. They just ejected.
Hmm.
And so we said, if Goose ejects and forgets to jettison the canopy, he could hit it and he could be killed. And that's how Goose was killed. It was a progression of a real world incident that wasn't. So it was based in reality. So what did the movie do good for the Tomcat? One, I've watched that movie, quite a few times.
Right.
I actually went to see it just relatively recently, when they released the 3D version.
3D
Did you hear
version.
about that? Yeah, there was a 3D version in IMAX theaters.
I didn't know that. Wow. Okay.
And so we're sitting there with glasses, and it was like remastered. I mean, it was a beautiful film. And there's the F-14 in 3D up on the screen, and I'm just going like, man, that looks so cool. So the movie makes the Tomcat look good, and it certainly, emphasizes the Tomcat's close-in maneuvering capability, which was good for its generation. I mean, when the Tomcat was new, it was a sensation with its maneuvering capability. The problem is, or not the problem, newer airplanes continued to be introduced. And so, the Tomcat was only a sensation for a few years. And then, the F-15 comes along, and F-16, F-18, et cetera. So,
Yeah, I think they had a version of the F-15 called the Sea Eagle, which was basically the naval version of the
yeah,
F-15.
that was a proposal. There
Yeah.
have been proposals of many land-based fighters, and there have been land-based proposals of many Navy fighters. There's a picture of an F-14 that says U.S. Air Force on it when they were trying to sell it to the Air Defense Command.
Really?
And there was a variant of the F-18 called the F-18L. Early in the program, it was supposed to be a lighter weight land-based F-18, so it had lighter landing gear, probably different structural members and stuff like that. But neither one of those, the F-14 air defense and the F-18L, neither one of those went very far. So the movie made the Tomcat, a movie star, and it went further than Final Countdown. Final Countdown is also a very nice movie, and the Tomcat looks good in Final Countdown.
Oh yeah, especially with the VF-84, Jolly Rogers. Everybody loves it. Yeah, VF-84.
Huh? Was that an F-14 squadron?
Yep. Oh, you're just making a joke now. Okay, I see how you are. No. I mean, they sensationalized that squadron so much. I mean, I've got my VF-84 Tomcat over here, so
West Coast VF2, buddy.
VF2 bounty hunters, right? How did I know that?
Nice, very well done, Dan.
So
okay, I'll stay.
He's got jokes. Okay, so we've got there's one more thing I wanted to kind of ask about the Tomcat. Why were the Russians so scared of the F-14? Because I've read, now you can debunk this or not, but why were they so scared?
Well, you'd have to read Russian literature, which I haven't read a lot. I'm sure a lot of it's available. But the F-14 at the time, remember, the airplane entered the fleet in 1974.
Right.
That was a long time ago. And it was a new generation of fighter. It had a long-range radar. It had look-down, shoot-down capability. It had good fuel specs, high speed, long endurance, good turning performance. It was a very capable and versatile fighter. In terms of defending the carrier, the Phoenix was credible as an excellent, missile to destroy bombers or to attack cruise missiles.
Especially with that Phoenix missile.
Yeah. One of my the great disappointments in my life is that the U.S. Navy has, a terrible record with the AIM-54 in combat, but the Iranians have shown that, it's a capable missile. So I think the Russians, at the time it was the Soviets. I think that would be a lot of good reasons why the Tomcat would show up on their radar in terms of concern. I mean, the F-14 was fast. It could go through Mach 1 very easily because of its aerodynamic design. It was there's reports I'm waving to my bookshelf over here. There's reports that during testing, some Tomcats went above the design speed of 2.3. I think one of them went to 2.4.
Wow.
Now, in my career, by the time I was flying the jets, they had stuff hanging on them and detuned engines. The Navy detuned the TF-30. They reduced the maximum thrust for longevity and for improved stall performance to reduce the stall likelihood. So we were flying airplanes. Many people think the TF-30 had 20,600 pounds of thrust. The NATOPS manual says the TF-30 has 17,000 pounds of thrust as it's installed.
Wow.
And so, it's a significant drop.
That is a significant drop. It's like maybe a couple thousand pounds.
More than 3,000 pounds per engine.
Amazing.
Anyway, the Tomcat was aerodynamically slick. The TF-30, even though it was 17,000 pounds sea level static thrust, it had a significant gain in thrust from the ram effect.
Right.
And I've tried to quantify this, but I saw a graph on it one time presented by Naval Air Systems Command, and it was unclassified, but I've been unable to find that. But I believe all jet engines do this. Thrust increases with airspeed. Well, the TF-30 being a turbofan, this effect was even more significant. So even though they detuned it, as you accelerated through Mach 0.8, 0.9, the thrust was greatly increased. How about that?
That's wow. I know that the D models had what, the TF-101, is that correct?
I think it was the 110.
110. Thank you. Okay. Um, have you heard? I think this is another good question. Northrop Grumman has proposed the Tomcat 2. What do you think about that?
I have not heard that, but I see stuff like that online now and then, and I go, all right. I mean, I can. I don't know if the Navy has asked for that, so Northrop Grumman can propose it. But yeah, I mean, if they were to make a Tomcat now with all the various lessons and improved materials and capabilities and things, it would be an incredible airplane.
It would be.
But also, I'm sure there's a lot of Phantom fanatics who would say, hey, put modern engines in the Phantom and a new radar, or like many countries have done that. They've updated their Phantoms and they're still flying them. So, yeah, a big new Tomcat, that would be cool, but I'm not holding my breath.
So Dave, you are the real goose.
No, don't say that though. They did not design Goose after me. And in fact, there were a couple of Rios with the call sign Goose before the movie came out.
Are you serious? Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
And there were a couple of pilots or Rios who had the call sign of Maverick.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, Pete Pettigrew was the real Viper, so.
Pete Pettigrew was the real Viper. That's something we can all agree on.
Don't forget to visit TopGunBio.com. Special thanks to Dave Bio Baranek. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel.